The amount of duties paid to the federal government has been growing really dramatically. $100 billion in 2022 and $250 billion to $500 billion this year. And so the opportunity for drawback there is growing linearly.
If I'm manufacturing shovels in the US and I import the shovel heads from China, and then I assemble the handles and the heads here, and then I sell all of those to Canada, all the duties I paid on those heads that I imported from China get refunded?
99% of them, yes.
$10 billion of drawbacks go unclaimed by US importers, which just tells you it must be really hard, otherwise they'd be going to file for that and get that refund.
You used to have to submit your drawback claim in person at the local port. You'd print out all of your bills of lading and commercial invoices and entries that you take your imports and exports and match them together by hand, and you'd go down and submit.
This is the changing world order. You can't constantly bank on trying to find a new country to work with.
The best thing that you can do is have a really strong footing in your product data and merging that with your customs data.
All right, well, Justin Sherlock, CEO and co-founder of Caspian, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Zach.
So we want to talk a lot about what's happening in the world of trade policy, customs, tariffs, all of that. But to start off, I'd love to just learn more about you and have you share some of your background and how you came to start Caspian.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up a New Yorker, so it's always fun to be back on my home turf here with Primary. I started my career in investment banking and then moved over to private equity doing technology-enabled services investing, thinking about how to help businesses scale with technology. And that was kind of the introduction to the logistics world for me. I went over to Flexport after about 4 years in finance and grew their trade finance business. We scaled it to over $1 billion of loan volume, and we had offerings in 20 countries. And that was my first exposure to tariffs and to the customs world. I also led an acquisition there for a customs broker in Canada, which helped Flexport expand into Canada, and really started to understand how tariffs were impacting companies' bottom lines, especially in e-commerce and consumer products. And then, I got really excited about the idea to help businesses solve for lowering their landed costs. Really saw how complex that can be, and we'll talk about why it's so hard today. But that was where the motivation for Caspian came from.
Great. And just to give some of the viewers an introduction, what is Caspian?
So Caspian is a duty drawback platform that uses AI to automate the ingestion and auditing of trade data to submit refund claims, basically, for tariffs. The vision of the product is really to take what has been a really manual consulting process that's painful for both the customer and for the service provider, and basically make this really, really seamless and ultimately expand past drawback to other types of duty mitigation strategies. There are many ways to save in the supply chain, and we think that the data gathered from drawback is really rich to be able to holistically assess a company's landed cost and ultimately help folks transact more efficiently and seamlessly across borders.
And the drawback specifically, I know we'll talk about other duty mitigation strategies, but the drawback has a pretty interesting history and also an interesting way that it's set up today. Could you walk us through what a drawback actually is and how it came to be?
Yeah, totally. So it's the Tariff Act of 1789 is one of the earliest laws of the United States, and I think actually the U.S. federal government collected tariffs from companies or customs duties from importers before they even collected an income tax. And this act, 300-year-old law, it was implemented drawback, and basically it's an export incentive. So if you are exporting, you're making a good here, you're storing a good here, and you're shipping it overseas, the idea is that, well, you shouldn't have to pay import duties to bring that product into the country, and then also pay import duties in the destination when you're selling a product overseas. And so it's a way to help U.S. businesses stay more competitive in a global marketplace. And it as a result, it's pretty bipartisan. It's about 10% of the Code of Federal Regulations, so it's like a big piece of or 10% of the Chapter 19 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the
What is that? What does that mean?
that's the section of U.S. federal law that governs customs and customs duties. Chapter 19 is called customs duties, and about 10% of that page count is drawback.
Wow.
And it's something that has been around for a long time and is evolving. So in 2018, there was a new law passed called the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, TIFTIA, and that basically modernized drawback and brought it into an electronic format. So you used to have to submit your drawback claim in person at the local port. You'd print out all of your bills of lading and commercial invoices and entries that you wanted to match together, take your imports and exports and match them together by hand, and you would go down and submit.
So just to make this maybe a little more concrete, if I'm manufacturing shovels in the U.S. and I import the shovel heads from China,
Yeah.
and then I assemble the handles and the heads here, and then I sell all of those to Canada,
Yeah.
all the duties I paid on those heads that I imported from China get refunded?
Yeah, 99% of them, yes. And it's also the merchandise processing fee and the harbor maintenance fee and these other charges and in the alcohol space, there's excise taxes that you pay to import alcohol. There's super fund fees in the oil and gas space. There's other types of fees besides just the duties, but certainly right now, the duties are growing pretty dramatically, and that's been a big focus for companies. We think that, it is a challenging process. We'll get into how exactly you make a claim, but we think that most businesses that are drawback eligible haven't explored it, or either might be unaware of it, or once they become aware of it, they say, "Wow, this is so painful. Like we don't want to do this. This is a difficult exercise." And so, if we can make this process much easier using technology, I think we'll lower the bar for everyone to start to participate.
So I think that's a good segue into why filing for drawbacks is just so hard. One thing that we've come across as we've done our diligence on Caspian is that $10 billion of drawbacks go unclaimed by U.S. importers, which just tells you it must be really hard. Otherwise, they'd be going to file for that and get that refund. So can you help bring that to life? Why is it so hard?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces here. One is just the size of the opportunity. The other one is the process, and then the third one is kind of eligibility and systems. And there's tackling the first one, I believe the opportunity for drawback, just based on the overlay of imports and exports and the overlap of HS codes there, is around 10% of duties paid to the federal government. So the amount of duties paid to the federal government has been growing really dramatically. Of course, this year, but even before this year, it was $40 billion in 2018, up to $100 billion in 2022, and accelerating rapidly this year. I think it will be somewhere between $250 billion to $500 billion of duties paid to the federal government. And so the opportunity for drawback there is growing linearly, frankly, with those duties paid. The exact process of how you claim is, the government doesn't make it easy. Of course, like that's you're taking money from the U.S. Treasury. So how you substantiate that you have exports is really critical. And what that means is that you need to oftentimes, to make it really easy, you oftentimes need to be both the importer and exporter of record on shipments. You can make claims if you're not the importer or exporter of record. That's called, a multi-party or third-party drawback, or a supply chain drawback, or terms that you'll hear. But really, if you're a single company trying to make a claim for yourself, you need to be importer and exporter of record, which means you're paying duties and you're shipping products out of the country. You're retaining those filings, those import and export filings, which are PDFs from your freight forwarders and your customs brokers. oftentimes that's, sitting in some operation manager's inbox. It's not getting stored centrally. So you kind of that's one challenge. The other piece is that your ERP and your inventory management system for all of your products needs to align and tie with all of those shipping documents. And that often isn't necessarily the case. The tech system could often be days off or not have the HTS code for a product saved in it. And these are things that we see pretty frequently, that we have to help companies make improvements to their operations so that the drawback process can operate much more seamlessly. And so I think just in general, and then of course there's the knowledge of how to create a claim, and mathematically how does that work? And there are, like I said, there's 1,000 pages of legislation on how the matching is supposed to work.
Yeah.
And once you get into manufacturing products, how do you map import transactions into a bill of materials for a good that's being manufactured and then shipped out? You have to show that both that paperwork, that trace set, to customs, and you also have to have a software product that does that calculation and optimizes for either your maximum claim or your most efficient or optimal claim, which means that like you're using as much of the high duty per unit imports on the claim as you can, or you're using all of the export units, even if you're leaving a number of imports on the table. So there's these different considerations that when you start to get into the weeds, it very quickly an in-house team, even at large companies, say, wow, this is not something that we want to really manage ourselves, and we do need a licensed expert to come in and look at this.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think, the baseline experience that folks are accustomed to in the space, is relying on a service provider to help with this because it's really complex.
I want to dig into a couple of things that you outlined there. The first of which is this 1,000-page policy guideline on how customs treats drawback claims. We as investors look for technology that makes companies more shock resistant from a supply chain perspective. That's the overarching theme of our supply chain investing thesis. And oftentimes when we talk about those shocks, we reference the big things that everyone sees in the news, the boats getting stuck in canals, the global pandemics, the ground wars, trade wars more recently. But things change a lot in that 1,000-page policy guideline. Mm-hmm. And those create shocks and changes to operations too. So how do the experts, the operators who are responsible for claiming drawback, handle that constantly changing door of policy around customs and drawback?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of how like the industry is doing it, and then how I think we're trying to do it. The industry it's a tight community of experts, and everyone in customs knows everyone in customs. There's I think about 10,000 licensed customs brokers in the country. There's a handful of conferences each year where a significant portion of the executives of those companies are all in one place. Often regulators will come, and there's this sort of sharing of knowledge and understanding. That was, I think, the system for the last decade or so. The Trump administration is really making it hard for that network-based management to work. I think there's a lot more activity on LinkedIn now with experts posting their view of the latest releases. But really, you need to stay on top of the Federal Register, the cargo systems messaging service, the cross-ruling system. These are all places that customs will post how they're enforcing recent actions or updating systems, like the automated commercial environment, ACE, which is where all customs entry activity, even for drawback, flows through ACE. That was part of the TIFTIA rule we talked about earlier. And how do you stay up to date on all those systems when literally day by day the policy is changing? It requires you to have really great email alerts, which are then being fed into, we use relay.app, and we ingest all of those notifications, and then, Reuters Tariff Watch and a couple of other things, and it creates recommendations for us. That's like how we've been staying ahead, so that when the executive order comes out, I can immediately know, okay, well, is Drawback eligible for these tariffs? Or when is the de minimis provision actually going to be closed? That was an announcement that came out today, is that, the next week, the Hong Kong and Macau and China-based parcel shipments are going to require formal entries. There's so much happening right now.
That'll mean that millions of packages coming to the country now need to be
Yes.
filed, which they didn't need to be previously.
Yes, up to 2,500. You'll be able to use an informal entry for packages up to 2,500 in value, but $2,500 in value, but that's still requires an entry, which is paperwork that you have to do. So anyway, that's a whole other. We're not in that space right now, but I think the point is it's impacting customers, and they're asking us these questions every day. So yes, we have to. We're serving Drawback, and we're providing trade advisory products post shipment, analyzing customers' data to find them refunds. But we also still have to stay abreast of everything that's happening, because it's impacting our customers, and the 232 aluminum, steel and aluminum tariffs are just as impactful to certain consumer brands as the Section 301 China tariff and the reciprocal tariff. And there's all these different tariff ordinals now that have been created, and so understanding how they impact a business is not easy.
What I want to get to is the fact that the Drawback people out there that do this stuff are kind of taking predatory. They're saying your data is going to be such a mess. It's going to be so hard to find this stuff. We're going to charge you 40% of what we find.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's that's the status quo today. And then from there, I want to go to what you were just talking about, which was what are customers? I want to ask you, are customers spending more time figuring out how to just mitigate their tariff liability sooner than they are looking for net new countries to operate and import from?
I hate dealing with Drawback. That's terrible. I had a customer who said when we first approached them, they said, I dealt with this at a prior company. It was terrible. No way you're going to actually make it that much better. There's a lot of scar tissue from people having to go through these audit processes, and the work is really difficult spreadsheet manipulation, unlike anything I had seen, even in building up models from scratch in when I was in finance. As a result, what ends up happening is that the services providers that sell Drawback today, they often will sort of have this approach of give us your data and we'll take it from there, and the data needs to be formatted in these specific ways. And so then it's incumbent on the customer to go and find the data, and that's really the hardest part, is finding it and structuring it. And which ERP reports do I pull? And cross-functionally in large organization, how can I get somebody to pay attention to me, whether it's a data analyst or a logistics team that actually has the documents I need, or any. There's so many pieces that you need to put together. And so the services provider will sort of say, once you send me these CSVs and these documents, I'll take it from there, and I'll take a third or 20% of the claim. We've seen fees for pretty substantial claim sizes in 20 to 30% range. And the reality is that the customer still then doesn't have visibility of the status of the project. They have to follow up over email with the provider. The provider's doing the work, with a team of associates, and has maybe a project timeline or a date if they're really good at project management, they'll say like, this is how long it'll take. It'll take us, once you get us all the pieces of data, assuming we don't have any questions, we'll get you a prepared claim in a month or 2 months. This is very standard stuff. And so to be paying that much in a success fee for this extended, lengthy process is just why people don't do this. And these are problems that can be solved by technology. So the technology that Caspian has built does the whole job end to end of going out and gathering data for a customer. So it's integrating with their systems and pulling reporting. It's integrating with their forwarders if possible, or at least embedding into their operation team's email addresses, or being CC'd on email threads to automatically ingest documents into our system. And then actually gathering and reconciling all of those sources together and structuring it into the format needed to make a drawback claim, making the drawback claim, submitting the drawback claim. Like, that process can be taken down to days, and it used to take months. And so I usually say, like, we'll generate at least a 75% time to value savings for businesses. But it for the right customers, it's like a 99% time to value saving, especially if they do a decent job of keeping shipping records centrally stored and their ERP. We're not managing too many ERP systems for a given customer. But yeah, I think the status quo is really, a little bit more hands off. It's sort of, well, how badly do you want the money? If you want it really badly, you'll send me the right information.
Yeah.
And it's
like a bounty hunter.
Yeah, exactly. And we're saying, well, we can actually help people get all the information and then do the rest of the claim work. The claim work is pretty mathematical. It's not actually the hardest part. It's not even the part that you really need AI for a ton. The AI applications are really in the data gathering, data structuring.
Okay, so that sounds like a mess. And it sounds like the amount of drawback work that's going to be required, or the amount of demand for drawback work, is going to spike with, increasing tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this intuitive impact of tariffs that a lot of us assume, which is that if you're importing from one country that gets hit with a tariff, you'll just move your operations to another country.
Yeah.
When you talk to customers today, how real is that? And how much are they focusing on that, re-architecting the geographic focus of their supply chains, versus building more of a systemic level resilience to supply chain changes and tariff changes with technology like Caspian?
Right. I think the sourcing takes quite a while to shift. You have to get bids from several factories. You have to potentially go fly out to those sites and see how the manufacturer operates. How clean is the facility? What level of tolerance am I going to accept on measurements, or depending on the type of product? You'll have sample shipments. So shifting sourcing is a month-long process. It takes going out to do site visits in a new factory, understanding the tolerance or quality that the factory can produce, getting sample shipments sent out. It is not that straightforward. And when you're talking about building in resilience to supply chain shocks, Drawback is one of those products that doesn't require a ton of operational changes in order to help build that resilience. And I think at a broader level, managing tariffs in general requires a strong data foundation, strong centralization of documents and records of all of your inventory, receipts, and fulfillments for all of your parts. Understanding how all of your parts and components and finished products are classified, and the tariff rates that you pay in the U.S. and in other countries on those goods. And that like systems foundation is critical to building that resilience to the tariff shocks, or to just changes in regulation with tariffs if it's not a shock per se, because they're ongoing.
The duty drawback stuff, I think, is clear. So it would be cool now, I think, to take us in the direction of like, what's the AI opportunity for tariff mitigation. And
Yeah.
if customers get their data and if they become sophisticated in structure, I shouldn't say sophisticated probably, but if they get the operational and tech stack needed to get drawbacks right, they can do all these other things that make them shock resistant in the face of changing trade policy.
Right.
So the opportunity for AI and drawback and the data collection and all of that stuff, that's clear to me. And then you talk about all these other things that companies can do if they get that drawback and data structure stack right, code changes and things like that, because it sounds almost like legal precedent where you've got this corpus of rulings by customs that have existed for hundreds of years that they're basing their claims on.
Right.
And so when you put that corpus of ruling together and all of the data that's coming out of current and future Caspian customers, what are the possibilities for tariff mitigation and how will customers benefit?
So the data you're gathering in the drawback process is holistic across a customer's demand chain and their supply chain. And as a result, you as a services provider or a technology provider have visibility into basically their entire P&L. And I think exposing the insights from that data while you're doing the drawback process is something that we've built into the application from day one. It was a big problem in prior roles that I encountered when I was at Flexport lending to consumer companies. Their finance stakeholders didn't always know how much duty spend they had, like how much were they paying in duties each year. That's a very basic insight. Like, okay, I spend $1 million in U.S. customs duties and my average tariff rate is X. But I think starting to bring in other stakeholders across a company into the tariff world and educating them is a big piece of value that we want to provide to companies. Give those trade professionals inside of a company more power in their organization to make change. As far as like how the next several products or insights that we can provide, there are several different ways that you can mitigate or lower your duties that customers aren't aware of, and drawback is one, but there's something called a first sale, which is basically if you're buying from a distributor or a middleman in a foreign country, you're not actually transacting directly with the factory. You can go to that vendor of yours and you can negotiate for a lower landed cost with what you report to customs as the value of the product. You can take the factory cost instead of the middleman's marked up cost. That's one small example. But for some customers can be a massive saving. There's things like Chapter 98, which is a portion of the harmonized tariff schedule that accounts for damaged or returned goods, American goods returning back to the U.S. A lot of companies end up paying double import duty on stuff that they're bringing back in that is returned from a foreign customer, but you want to get those products excluded. There is a comprehensive audit of a customer's ACE data that exposes whether or not their brokers are consistently using free trade agreements in relevant countries of origin. And there's all these process errors that happen because just the customs process is so manual that you do want to go back and audit these transactions were filed correctly with customs. And so doing those post-entry audits, looking at as the harmonized tariff schedule changes, looking at what's the best classification for your products, both from a tariff rate perspective and just a compliance perspective. Doing that on an ongoing basis because we're integrated into a company's product data is something that a drawback software company is uniquely positioned to provide. And so, yeah, that I just listed like 10 different things, but there's truly a huge range because it depends on the sector that the customer's in. There are certain, if you're a manufacturer, you have to consider how you're how you're using foreign trade zones, or if you're in agriculture, are you buying on consignment? Like all of these strategies or levers to either lower the value of the product that you're paying duties on, or to lower the duty rate itself. And being in that data flow with a model advising, in addition to a licensed customs broker, is just a beautiful place to be for Caspian.
And on that, being a licensed customs broker this early on is something you don't see a lot of startups do. Flexport famously acquired a customs broker to launch that part of their business. What does that actually take, and why is it so important to your business?
Yeah, so there was a great Wall Street Journal article that came out, I think yesterday, about the customs brokerage licensing exam, the CBLE as it's known. It's a beast. It's, a 4 hour SAT. It's the hardest test I've ever taken, for sure. I've taken a lot of hard tests, and it was serious. Our team decided pretty quickly that because the strategy is not just Drawback, it's about a broader trade advisor, an agentic trade advisor. We needed to have really strong rooting in customs holistically, and so that was a big piece. Was just the learning of going through that exam, and then the other piece of it is more strategic. We, from the very early days of the company, wanted to work directly with customers. And that's the most exciting thing for us, is to see somebody send you a picture of the check that they received from Treasury, and like for all that hard work to have paid off. And so we wanted to be as close to that feeling and impact as possible. And that meant that we had to be a licensed brokerage in order to sell a drawback service. We also wanted to, like I mentioned, do the whole job of the service. So that meant not just selling someone a piece of software that they could use to do a drawback claim, but actually taking as much work off their plate as possible and charging for that outcome, which again required us to be a licensed broker. On the software side, because we are a broker, we can approach channel partners and say, hey, look, either we'll be your drawback broker that you refer out deals to, or we can also help you grow your own drawback team. And I think having that flexibility is really nice. It builds trust with the channel partner to say, let's do a trial deal. We'll file on our license. We'll use our own ABI connection with customs to submit all the claims, and then shift over time to, okay, well, we've trained you up on this, and now you have your own in-house team providing drawback services to directly to customers, and you're just using our matching and our ABI and our workflow tool. So that's really I think why the broker license is so important to us.
Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of trade policy volatility, and the need for products like Caspian is growing. Is this the new normal? And if so, what should customers be doing to prepare?
So this is the changing world order. At least for the past 10 years, the rate of change in the supply chain ecosystem has been dramatic, certainly since COVID, that's been the case. And I think really you can't bake on constantly changing your countries of origin every time a tariff rate changes, or changing your sourcing. It's too disruptive to your business. The best thing that you can do is have a really strong footing in your product data and merging that with your customs data. And so basically that means keeping all of your products, their descriptions, their classifications, and those duty rates for the relevant supply and demand countries in a central place, so that anytime these rates change or policy changes, you have an idea of the extent to which you need to adjust pricing or adjust volume of purchasing those products. And so that owning that harmonized product catalog, or that duty matrix, companies call it different things, is I think a really key foundation to staying adaptable when the laws and policy are evolving so quickly.